Palantir.
Hey, this is not a test. This is rock and roll. Time to rock it from the Delta to the DMZ. Is that me or does that sound like an Elvis Presley movie? Viva Da Nang. Oh,
All right, welcome back to the channel. Hope you all have a nice coffee with you and are ready to get going here. I'm sure you all noticed I've been changing my content a little bit. I'm getting more developer focused on the channel, but I don't want to alienate all you investors and subject matter experts out there, because as you're going to see later in the video, it's super important that we all team up together to really maximize the value of Foundry and transform the broader U.S. economy. So the first, let's get right into it. The topic of today's video: tectonic shifts are underway at Palantir. The platform has sort of moved away from being a walled garden and something that's primarily used by a handful of enterprise customers and Foundry's or Palantir's FTEs to an open platform that can now be used by anyone to build value. And a lot of you have all missed the significance of this change, both what it means for the Palantir and its culture, and also what it means for all of us who are sitting out here on the outside, right? And so I think that first, let's just talk about the fact that this change in focus and bringing new people into Foundry is a big deal for Palantir internally. And I think there have been a little bit of restructuring, a little bit of change internally. This has been a long-standing battle, I think, at the company. And I think that if you look at some of the things that have happened that you can observe publicly, you'll start to put those pieces together. And so I think that, one, just recognizing that as a culture, the company has really had to change in order to adapt to this new way of being, this new world. They're doing it very, very well, and I'm extremely impressed with the people I've been interacting with as part of the support system and developer relations program. We'll say this is something they've tried before, and they have tried to move into dev relations before, and I don't think it had the right alignment and support, and it didn't work. And it looks like in this case, hopefully, this is going to work, and the team's executing really, really well. But let's all appreciate for a minute, what's happening is you've got I like this sandbox analogy, right? Like Palantir has this sandbox, and they have the most beautiful tools for building the most beautiful sandcastles, but it's primarily just been them in the sandbox. And then all of a sudden, here come these edgy, crazy, freaking who knows, where did these people come from, developers who are going to jump in the sandbox with them, rip up all the shit they've been building, misuse all the toys, put the bucket on their head, run around, I am Cornholio, right? It's going to be crazy. And I think it's a huge, huge change. But look, it's better to have people in the sandbox and to play together, and you're actually going to build some of the most amazing art together, right? And these developers that are coming in are going to use the platform in ways Palantir has never intended, but that is going to create a source of friction. And I think that you really just have to be on board 100% with, we need to empower these people, because it's like skateboarding. I use this analogy a lot. It's they're going to use this platform in ways you never intended, but they're going to build some amazing shit with it. And so this big shift, this cultural battle, this upheaval, I think it's ultimately good for the company. And it underscores that they've passed a key threshold here. They've gone through the Rubicon, which is they've gone from a data platform primarily used by enterprises to an application building platform that needs to be used by the world to create the next generation of software. That is a massive transformation. And you see it with AIP now. This is not a data platform anymore. This is a AI forward application building platform that abstracts away all the hard parts of the cloud, reinvents SaaS under a new distribution model that removes 90% of the complexity of building and delivering a solution. And it's putting it in the hands of one full stack engineer, one data scientist and maybe mathematician, and a subject matter expert who can now go out and build epic shit, right? So this is incredible. And we're going to get into, the second half of this video. I'm going to talk a lot about team structures and how you can build startups and et cetera. So we'll talk more about that later. But before we get into that, let's do a quick lesson on Hyrum's law, right? You can Google Hyrum's law. I'm going to butcher it. I'm going to give you the cliff notes, but basically Hyrum Wright from Google, one of the people I look up to, someone who's been very, I've sort of followed a lot of his work along with Titus Winters from Google. He came up with this law that basically says any observable aspect of your system given enough usage is going to be consumed, right? And probably in ways you didn't want it to be, right? And so this new transition that Palantir is going through, prioritizing developer experience, giving them the things they need, what's going to happen is if there's any pushback, if there's anything missing in the platform that they don't have today, they're going to use what they can observe. So that maybe that's an API you don't want them to use, or maybe that's misusing models, and I'll give you an example of that in a second. But the faster you can meet the needs of the developer, the less you're going to have to deal with Hyrum's law, which is like any observable aspect of Foundry being consumed in ways you probably didn't intend. And that's why it is so important to prioritize developer experience and prioritize changes that need to be made to prevent Hyrum's law from taking over Foundry in a very short order, right? And so like a good example, just really quickly, there's no easy way to make API calls and functions on objects. That's the API layer in Foundry where a lot of developers are going to be spending their time. I can't just call an API. The expectation was that why don't you just integrate that data through an external transform, like bring data in from the underlying source system. That's not how apps are made, right? And a lot of it, you can't just import the data from the underlying system. So developers typically integrate APIs in their applications to avoid copying data, right? They either can't or don't want to. And so there is a robust, what we call API economy out there in the world that developers want to consume. So there's no easy way to do that as a developer right now in Foundry. And so we've hacked our way around it. What we did is we misused models to give us a hole that would allow us to make API requests outside of Foundry and consume those in our functions inside Foundry. So like that is an example of Hyrum's law taking over. You do not want developers creating models just to make API requests. And webhooks, it was an answer to that. I think they've sort of missed the mark, and developers are going to continue to probably use models because it's easier and they can make a single proxy and just add egress policies. So like, I would just say that as they've crossed this Rubicon and they've entered this new world of being an app building platform for the world, it's going to require quick addressing of problems in the platform that aren't meeting the current needs, both because it will turn developers off, which you don't want to do, but also because it's going to lead to this proliferation of Hyrum's law throughout your stack, and it's going to be like 10 times harder a year from now to undo that as people roll out applications and solutions that are built in ways that they shouldn't have been built, right? And that's not, in my opinion, that is not the fault of the developer. That's your fault for not giving them the tools they need to do their job. So that's my quick lesson on Hyrum's law and what I see sort of being a source of internal conflict, because what's going to happen is you're going to have to prioritize some things over others, and where does developer experience fit here, and like why, and what you'll get back into are these old arguments that exist internally in Palantir where they're essentially arguing philosophy. And I would just say that no one cares about your fucking philosophy if you're trying to be an app platform. The only thing that they care about is like rates of adoption, essentially your NPS score among developers, the cool shit that's being built on it, your rates of growth, etc. So like everything else has to be secondary, in my opinion, to the sort of developer experience and giving them the tools they need. So it's going to be a tumultuous, I think, next year at Palantir as these new priorities that are coming from outside the company, crazy people like me demanding things that need to be in the platform. Like, it's going to be a fucking shit show at a lot of levels. But I think that it's going to be good. And ultimately, like, we all need to recognize, like, this is a massive tectonic shift for the company. All over the place, I'm seeing a huge uptick in adoption. I'm seeing a big uptick in adoption. I don't want to oversell things. And I think that enterprises are finally figuring out that there's something to this Foundry thing, right? And like, they see all of the videos, they have this tool in their stack, they're wondering like maybe how to approach it or extract value from it, or maybe they've got some champions already in their org who love this platform. And so I think we are starting to see the I get it now moments around Foundry at a lot of these enterprises, and the funnel's opening up now too to customers who maybe previously couldn't afford Foundry, and obviously the broader developer community. So those moments are happening at a much faster rate, and you're just gonna have to trust me on that one. I also noticed like companies are very sick of the Frankenstein monster. If you go back and watch my interviews from like 2021 and 2022, I predicted that 2025 would be the inflection point for Palantir, and that was mostly driven around by my experience building these Frankenstein monsters and seeing the high rates of failure of trying to build your own Foundry-like platform, big data platform. There's a lot of shit to do. We'll cover in a second like what the modern big data stack kind of looks like. but like managing that complexity at scale is extremely difficult. And so my thesis on Palantir from a developer perspective was like, eventually all these homegrown initiatives are too complex, companies will scrap them and they'll move towards a solution that's made by the industry. Because anytime you see all this undifferentiated heavy lifting and a large amount of complexity, what ends up happening is there's usually a platform that emerges that fills that gap, and companies can get out of the software business and focus on the business they're actually in, right? And I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see that also business is sick of the misalignment between IT and the business. There is a very real source of friction of these long-going IT projects that have become, I won't call them boondoggles, but like it's sort of this thing where the business doesn't even remember why they started these initiatives in the first place. It's just like, it's been going on for so long, we just assume we need to build a data lake and a data platform and blah, blah, blah. So like, I think that there's this questioning that's going on, especially as like businesses grapple with supply chain disruptions. So, economy that's not doing all that great. Exactly why are we building this again? Remind me. And that this friction is like, they don't want to wait another year for IT to come up with a solution to a problem they need to solve today. You have to, this misalignment between the business need and the IT, sort of way they work and deliver, I think is very real. And it's what I observed years ago. And I could see that trend kind of snowballing. And I still believe that. I still think 2025 is sort of the year when all of these internal initiatives are going to face amazing amounts of pressure and will just ultimately be replaced by a platform that solves these problems. And Palantir Foundry is not the only one. There's things like Fabric, and there's things like Databricks, and there's other emerging technologies from Amazon that look very promising. And Amazon's, had a pretty decent data platform for quite a while if you can stitch it all together. But Foundry is still the only one you can implement in weeks, not months, right? So I think that Foundry has this unique advantage of being able to recapture momentum in a much faster way. And now that the barriers to entry and pricing have come down so much, there's really no reason to just not use Foundry. Like, why would I want to take another tool that will take me longer and is harder to learn and is still an amalgamation of several services, like when I can just take this one product that has a good learning platform around it and has good support in consultancies and enterprise world to learn it and support it, like just use Foundry, right? So like I do think the aha moments are happening. I do think that people are sick of the Frankenstein monster, etc. And so let's just take a real quick look at what does that Frankenstein monster actually look like in the past and maybe what it might look like in the future. All right, so let's take a look at that Frankenstein monster. I just Googled this image. So the modern data stack, most of these are garbage. A couple of them are okay. But like I found this one was pretty decent. So like this is pretty representative of all of the components that go into our modern data stacks that we use for business intelligence and data-driven decision making. It's complicated, right? Look at all these things. Just look at the sources, right? Like, my God, having to integrate all these. Yes, there are data connectors. There's companies that specialize in this. Fivetran, CData. CData is the most common one I see. But like, it's still complicated. You still have to integrate these as separate offerings, developer tools. You need a whole team of engineers to support it, and you got to map all this onto a cloud architecture typically, which is its whole other set of platform engineering that you have to worry about. And typically when you do that, by the way, you do get vendor locked to a cloud provider. As much as you might try to obfuscate the control plane of the hyperscaler, it ends up getting embedded in your code. And I've yet to see basically anything at scale or any decent complexity be able to be portable between two cloud providers just one-to-one. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Don't go crazy in the comments. What I'm saying is it's just very uncommon and eventually you do end up getting those APIs embedded in your system. So you got that whole other layer to deal with, which is the control plane. And you try to use tools like Terraform to abstract it, but eventually you just end up having to write a lot of custom code to deal with it. So anyway, very complicated. And I often hear people like say things like, can't Tableau just do what Foundry just did? Well, no, because Tableau doesn't do all of this. Look at everything to the left of Tableau, people, right? Just everything to the left of Tableau. You don't get a modern data stack with a data warehouse or lake house with Tableau. You have to build all that other machinery, and then Tableau kind of sits on top of it. Tableau is a great product, so is Power BI, so is Looker, but they're shallow products in that they're assuming you have this data infrastructure to then use them. Whereas Foundry provides the entire iceberg, not just the tip of the iceberg, but the whole thing to the left, right? And it does so in a way that it exposes it for non-technical people. It's like approachable. You can walk up, you can scroll through your data sources, connect SAP, connect Salesforce, connect everything else that's in your organization that you want to support. And you can do so with a visual interface, right? Anyone can do that, in my opinion. And then once the data source is hooked up, you can use Pipeline Builder. If you've been following my videos on the parsing of the SEC documents, you can use a visual tool to not only process structured data, but unstructured data like documents, right? Like, oh my God, like that's not even talking about how complicated this thing gets when you're trying to do unstructured data, right? So Foundry is very, very good at fulfilling all of these things and obfuscating the complexity, because the hardest thing to do in software engineering is manage complexity at scale. And that's why whenever you see these sort of undifferentiated heavy lifting that's going on in these spaces to manage complexity across multiple enterprises, eventually a company shows up that just fills the gap and provides a platform to do it for them. So anyway, that's the Frankenstein monster. Let's get back to the main topics. All right. So now that we've covered sort of the Frankenstein monster and some of the challenges, or some of the predictions there, and maybe the shifts that are going on among customers, let's just talk about the last part of this video, which is what I sort of see as the common challenges as companies look to not just position Foundry. It might be other technology, but primarily when they're trying to adopt Foundry, I see a common set of issues, and I created something called the Scaled Foundry Adoption Framework to deal with that. And the challenges, I think, fall into several buckets. But the first one is like, how does Foundry fit into my stack? Like we often see this with when people like the technology side of the house at an enterprise or small business is like, look, I've got all these tools, right? Like, and I think that's something a lot of Palantir investors miss. Every enterprise has basically every tool. It's not like an enterprise just has Foundry or Databricks or Snowflake. It's like they've got them all, dude. They've got all the tools. Pretty much any organization at a certain size you're going to walk into has every piece of technology you could possibly imagine, and it's how they all fit together, because typically when a company is adopting a technology, that might not be driven by central IT function. It might be driven by a line of business function. And so this team over here wants Databricks because maybe that's the tool that is the sharpest tool for them to build a model. Or maybe they want Snowflake because they really appreciate the data warehousing capabilities and the ease of use and like how good this thing is at scale. So like there's different reasons people adopt different technologies. They're often driven from the bottom up in organizations, not necessarily the top down. But then you get this weird misalignment in strategy for the technology side of the house, where they have to kind of figure out where all these things fit together, what business functions they're driving, should they be consolidated, etc. So like there's always the question around these things, not just Foundry, but Foundry is the least understood, I think, in a lot of cases. So we often have to coach people around where does Foundry fit in my stack? What's the right layer? And to me, like personally, the way I see Foundry fitting in a stack is it's an abstraction layer over the cloud. It powers operations. It pretty much replaces all the parts of your business that still run on Excel. And it gives you a nice layer to operationalize all those other assets that are being created in these other technologies, right? And so Foundry is very much a unifier. It's not a divider. It very much brings these other technologies together and make them 10 times more valuable when trying to leverage the products of those technologies. So for example, if I build a data product in Databricks or a model, it's actually complicated to operationalize that data product or model, because I've got to add a bunch of things that, yes, Databricks tries to make it easy to build inference endpoints, but it doesn't provide an application building layer to incorporate those inference endpoints, and it's still not probably the thing I want to use in a lot of cases. So there's all these other bits I've got to add around it, and so Foundry makes all of that super simple, and all those products coming out of Databricks, for example, are first-class citizens in Foundry. So understanding that Foundry is this great unifier of all these things, it serves as sort of a central hub in which you can now extract way more value from these assets, because citizen engineers, and especially if you pair them with like a single software engineer, you can get like 20 citizen engineers building solutions that actually operationalize and use these things, right? So it is a layer above all these foundational things that typically abstracts away the hyperscaler that you're using. You're still using a hyperscaler. Their CPUs and GPUs are going to be warm, don't worry. But you don't have to deal with the complexity of building an end-to-end solution on that on a hyperscaler. And it's much easier to get to the actual point where these other products, these other things you've built are actually valuable to the business. And it brings down the friction between the IT side of the house and the business. That friction I was talking about earlier, Foundry is great at reducing that friction. So that's sort of where it fits in the stack. A layer above the hyperscaler, it serves as a way to integrate. It's a central hub to integrate all of your various data assets, model assets, other technology assets, and to build apps that people can actually use using a team of citizen engineers paired up with a small group of subject matter experts and software engineers to actually operationalize this stuff and transform your business, right? So that's where it sits. And then the other thing we often see is like, how do I build an enterprise ontology? Like building and maintaining an enterprise ontology is a challenge, right? You have to have certain standards, you have to have certain common definitions of what things are in the business, a process for managing change, and also a process for not requiring everything to fit in the enterprise ontology. Like if I want to build a solution just to manage some process and I want to build it in Foundry because it's a much better tool than Excel at doing that, I don't want to necessarily have to integrate that into the enterprise ontology, maybe not initially, right? And so there has to be this process to allow people still to have the freedom to build. But then how do you fold the concepts they're creating into the enterprise ontology, and what's the process by which you do that? How do you maintain integrity, make sure you don't break things? And that gets into the next part of this framework, which is the software development lifecycle in Foundry, or the SDLC. How do you manage changes? How do you create feature branches for data transformations? How do you create feature branches for your ontology, which is now possible? Do I need a dev, test, and prod environment? No. We adopt GitHub Flow, the equivalent of GitHub Flow in Foundry. So, you need good observability. You need a process by which you can create new features that can be merged and reviewed and reasoned about and see what the effects are downstream. So there is a very robust SDLC inside Foundry, and we've developed a framework for that. So that's a big one. And what that allows you to do when you have a good SDLC and you understand how to properly manage changes, both with feature branches, quality checks, assertions, and then reasoning about the effects downstream, and having a wide table strategy that lets you release new columns in an intuitive way that let people know which columns are stable, which columns are not. Like all these things fit together to form a really a robust way to manage complexity, right? And 90% of the reason, actually almost 100% of the reason that big, large-scale digital transformations fail and large-scale data engineering projects fail is complexity at scale. If you don't have a way to manage the changes that get introduced in those systems and reason about the effects and monitor those effects, observe those effects, your project's going to fail. And a lot of the time that those underlying things that Foundry is really good at, like the SDLC, those are the most overlooked aspects of large-scale digital transformations. And I'm actually going to do a series called Code Reacts, and I'm going to cover failures in digital transformations. Pretty hilarious. So anyway, that's the scaled Foundry adoption framework. There is a little bit more to it as well. I recommend how you build COEs, Center of Excellence teams, or platform engineering teams that help automate quality outcomes as well, giving teams the tools they need in order to build quickly and in a robust way without reinventing the wheel for your organization. So all that fits together into what I call the scaled Foundry adoption framework, and that is a big focus, I think, of a lot of the current customers and new customers who are coming in. Like, they need answers to those questions, and luckily there's a lot of people like me out there who are working on these problems and helping solve them. And I think those lessons translate even to small startups, right? Even the small builder programs, I think, can benefit from an adoption framework that makes sense and lets you get the most out of the platform. So that's it for this week's Palantir and Coffee. Look forward to doing these, probably every week. And send me your ideas for topics on X. I got a lot of good suggestions on there in the last post. I didn't cover them all, but appreciate you all tuning in. I will get to those in latter episodes. And keep sending me your suggestions, and I hope you have a wonderful day.